With the success of Marvel Rivals, it's become more and more clear over recent months that there is no such thing as superhero fatigue. People just want good content, and with more love coming to Marvel characters who never seem to get attention they deserved, I think it's only fair we give the same limelight to the other member of the big two, DC.
You serious?
Now, I don't really think DC would or should necessarily make a hero shooter, especially with Rivals being so successful, but the thought experiment of who'd be on the starting roster and how each character would play sounds really fun. So if you've seen our Rivals videos before, you might know how this works, but basically I'm going to be picking 3 characters, in this case the DC Trinity, and building them into a full hero shooter kit in the style of Marvel Rivals, of course. I've actually made a full roster of characters to match that of Marvel Rivals on launch. So over the coming months, we'll be making our way through that and building our very own DC Infinite Crisis. I wasn't 100% on the name since it's already a comic book, but you guys voted for it, like way more than the others. So Infinite Crisis the game, it is. Now, what is DC without its most iconic and successful hero? The man whose name is plastered everywhere. I swear, he gets more projects than like any other superhero ever. So, we're starting off, of course, with Batman.
No, you are not my father. I am not a disgrace. I am vengeance. I am the night. I am Batman.
Bruce Wayne, aka Batman, is one of the most recognizable superheroes ever. And I really had to put myself to the test when deciding how he should play. There seems to be this consensus amongst people on the internet that he should be a strategist, and at first I agreed. But when making characters, I always think, what is the fantasy? How should you feel playing as them? And honestly, I couldn't see someone who wants to feel like Batman being a strategist. He just doesn't fit naturally into that role. Sure, he has the gadgets and the planning to be made into one, but he just fundamentally doesn't fit. So the idea I lent into was all about hiding in the shadows and then striking hard and fast like a predator of the night. Honestly, this whole kit is kind of Arkham game inspired if you've ever played those games. So to start off, we have his attacks. Yes, 2 of them, the first being his Bat Gauntlets. The Bat Gauntlet is a basic melee attack with a short range that you can use to combo. I imagine having like a multi-hit different swings, where it kind of works a little bit like a few of the other characters in Marvel Rivals, say Captain America's punches or Spider-Man's attacks, where this is his main way of dealing damage and probably his highest consistent damage, but it's got a really short distance, so you have to be able to get close up to your enemies. Of course, this ties hand in hand with his secondary attack being the Batarang, arguably Batman's most iconic weapon. This is a low damaging projectile that has a higher crit percentage than most other attacks in the game. The idea for this is to reward people's skill levels if they're able to land those headshots, because this would be a projectile and quite a small one. It'd be hard to hit, but if you do land those crits, it's gonna really pay off. But generally speaking, it's still gonna be a little bit of damage that helps you finish off enemies running away or deal with enemies as you close the distance before getting in those Bat Gauntlet attacks. Now, how I'd automatically have the binding for these, it would probably be a case of like left click, right click, instead of it being a swap weapon. The idea behind that being you want to be able to really quickly switch between throwing punches and the Batarang. The other thing is, to punish misaiming and using the Batarangs incorrectly, Batman would have a short amount of ammo count and would have to reload them often. I actually think a really cool way that you could sort of design it into the character's actual, like I say, design would be, imagine those arm blades that Batman always has on his gauntlets. What if there's 3 on each arm, and they're his 6 Batarangs? He can fire 3 really quickly, a short gap between the next set of 3, and then he has a full reload where he re-pops out the arm blades. I think just the concept and visuals of that sounds really cool. I don't know if it would work. I don't know if everyone would like that. Maybe people prefer the batarangs being on the chest like in the Patterson film. Or maybe people prefer the batarang being in his utility belt like it classically is. Either way, I still think the batarang needs to be incorporated some way, but I don't think it should be a large damage dealing attack. Of course, no hero in a hero shooter is anything without their actual unique powers and abilities. And that's where we get into how I designed Batman as a duelist. You see, he is an assassin type duelist. A good example of that would be a character like Psylocke, whose whole job is going completely undetectable, sneaking up on a single target who's an easy pick off from their group, taking them out quickly and then escaping danger. Often, assassin types aren't great at dealing with masses and crowd control, but are really good in 1v1s and have that natural advantage when you don't know where they're coming from. So his whole kit revolves around him being able to move around the arena, hide in the shadows, get enemies into positions that help him, and then finish them off. Of course, we do start off with his bowlers. The bowlers are his primary method of placing an enemy in a position where he can guarantee easy aim and easier crits. See, the bowler is a projectile that when thrown goes on cooldown, and if it hits an enemy, it wraps around their legs, and whilst it doesn't stun them, it revokes any ability for them to move. So they can still shoot and they can still spin around and they can use their cooldowns as long as it isn't a cooldown that makes them move physically. But what they can't do is walk. This is also Batman's primary method of dealing with characters who can fly, since his main attack is a melee attack and he doesn't exactly have something that dashes him to them. This means that he grounds them on the earth and then can take them out before they're flying again. If enemies see that you're about to throw a bowler at them, it's a large projectile, you can see it, some of the time they'll be able to dodge it or try and counter it, so you need to be striking from the shadows. That's Batman's whole shtick, and that's where smoke bombs come in. Now these double as two different ways to obscure enemies' vision. First of all, it's a thrown projectile, not like a drop one, so when you lob this, wherever it lands, a smoke screen will appear. This blinds enemies' lines of sight, meaning they don't see which direction Batman's going to go, or his allies. But the smoke bomb comes with a secondary feature. You see, whenever Batman walks through either his or an enemy Batman's smoke screen, he turns invisible. Now, he's only invisible until he either uses one of his cooldowns, one of his basic attacks, or until he takes damage. But until any of those specific things happen, no one can see him other than his allies, obviously. This is sort of meant to emulate the stealth mechanics that you see in most Batman video games, and how he's depicted as just disappearing into the shadows in a lot of his medias. I think it's such a cool and iconic part of the character, the fact that you lose sight of him. It's even like a key element in when Jim Gordon, his friend, speaks to him, and he vanishes on the rooftop whenever he turns around. And so I wanted to implement that into his mechanics, and since he's an assassin type hero, that just makes sense and it feels natural. Now the smoke bomb, unlike other assassin types with their access to their invisibility, would probably have a decent length cooldown just because it doubles up as a smoke screen and you never know necessarily which direction he's coming from, and it can be thrown at range as well. But I could also see maybe you give him another method of shortening the cooldown on it so that he can regain it for necessary moments. I don't know, that's something that could be workshopped and thought about. I just think it's a really fun feature that needed to be a part of this core character. We know how he's able to sneak up on enemies and we know how he's able to get them into crucial positions where he can damage them, but how does he actually traverse the map? Well, we start off with his backclaw. And the backclaw, I'm going to be honest with you, is extremely similar to Moon Knight's grapple hook. I really wanted to make Batman feel like Batman without copying other heroes, really. If you guys have seen my Marvel Rivals videos, you'll know I really avoid just straight up copying characters. I really try to just come up with brand new concepts for how these people work. But so much of what makes Batman Batman is already incorporated into so many different heroes in hero shooters. I think it's partially because so many heroes are inspired by him, but I think it's also just because his gadgets are naturally well designed into games and gaming, and therefore have led to appearing in tons of different interpretations. Say Psylocke's invisibility, say when we get to the remote hacking device, that's features when we get there, and of course, as I said, Moon Knight's traversal. I also think in Marvel Rivals, a lot of people compare Moon Knight to Batman primarily because his movement is very Batman-esque. I know he's always had a little bit of a comparison, but it's really been amplified ever since the whole throwing out little, basically batarangs and gliding around with a cape. So the backclaw, you fire at a wall or a surface and it launches Batman into the air. And from that, you can use his ability, Caped Crusader, by holding down the jump button Batman spreads his wings out, his cape even, and glides forward. The gliding speed being faster than his walking speed, but the fall speed of it being slower than a normal fall. But what about the element that makes Batman so iconic? His prep time. Everything he does to prepare for enemies. Well, that's where explosive gel comes into play. You see, this is an ability that when he presses it initially, he will fire a small gel outwards a very short distance with a really quick drop off, so it would normally land on the floor. But if you're right by a wall or a surface, it will attach to that wall or surface instead. And then when you re-trigger this ability, it explodes. The proximity of the gel would be really small, but the damage amount would be super high. So you can do this a couple different ways. When entering an area, you can make your main exit an explosive gel area by maybe you find a doorway before you run over to an enemy and you slap some gel there. And then when you finish attacking that enemy, if it goes south and you need to flee, you can run through that doorway, and if that enemy chases after you, you can set off the gel, confirming the KO or the kill. Alternatively, the explosive gel could come into setups where you don't have smoke bombs ready and you need a different way to deal with enemies. So you use the gel really quickly to deal high damage in an instant, or use the gel once again in that similar scenario where you place it in a dangerous area that you know the enemy's going to go to when you're fighting them, and that can deal with them. It's all about preparation, it's about knowing where people are going to be and when, and then dealing with them efficiently. Which moves us onto his final ability. And this was an ability I mainly incorporated because I felt like he seems a little bit low tech. He has a lot of tech powers, but none of them seem science fictionally super advanced. And this is an iconic item from the Arkham games, and we've already seen it in a hero shooter in the form of Overwatch before, and that is the remote hacking device. The idea here is when you're right nearby a health pack spawner, you can hack it, disabling it for a short duration. This then puts remote hacking device on cooldown, and it means that nobody can interact with that health pack. Now, to make it a bit more interesting, and because this is a hypothetical video game, I'd also want to throw in the idea of maybe there are certain doors and windows that open and close based on either interacting with things or just at certain points in map changes and progression of points and stuff. So I think it would be really cool if he could lock certain doors and certain windows, meaning that you have to go through certain alleyways and certain hallways, which may then have explosive gels in them and stuff. It would be really cool if he could use the remote hacking device to actually corner off areas and use his preparation to its best potential. Of course, active abilities are never the only abilities heroes have at their disposal. We also have the passives, and in this case Batman only has one, and it's his iconic detective vision. He is the world's greatest detective, and so he should have something to resemble that. Now this is, once again, a almost riff from an existing hero shooter character, that being Punisher in Marvel Rivals. This power is very much inspired by the idea of seeing your enemy's outlines once they leave your line of sight. This would also double as a way for him to see through his own smoke screen. That's, I feel, is kind of the reason they gave it to Punisher, and that's exactly why I'd give it to Batman. But as you play the game and you perform your stealthy takedowns and then retreat back into the shadows and basically deal with everyone, you're slowly going to build up that ult, leading to your amazing fear takedown. Now this feels like a fusion of the Arkham Knight super move, the multi-fear takedown, and almost like Psylocke's ultimate. And here's how it works. Batman unleashes a giant smoke screen, bigger than his normal smoke bomb, and all enemies within it are revealed with a yellow highlight around them. Yellow highlighted enemies can be targeted by Batman, and when you then press the attack button, so the mouse or the right trigger, Batman dashes over to them almost instantly and hits them for a super powerful attack. Two of these would basically kill any squishy enemy. Now, the way to balance this is he can't select the same enemy twice in a row, and he can only select enemies highlighted in yellow. So if there are two enemies within a cloud, he can hit enemy 1, then enemy 2, then jump back to enemy 1, then jump back to enemy 2. But what he can't do is dash over to enemy 1 and then hit enemy 1 for a second time immediately. He has to move between them. Now, enemies obviously with fast mobility are going to try and get out of the smoke screen quicker, so they're going to be a higher priority to hit first. The control and targeting means that you can really view your area at the risk of hitting less enemies because you're taking more time, or you can try and just mash that attack button while spinning your camera around and hit as many people for as much damage output as physically possible. Then when the power ends, the smoke screen dissipates and Batman becomes invisible as though he had walked through one of his own smoke screens, meaning that immediately after ulting, you can quickly chase after the lowest health person, hit them with a bowler, and then finish that person off. I think that's a fair trade-off for the whole you have to take your own brain to figure out who you're shooting, versus an ult like Psylocke's where the PC auto throws you at enemies so you're never missing that damage output. It also is a nice trade-off given, you know, the smoke screen doesn't move, whereas a lot of ults like this can move, so Batman just gets that invisibility immediately afterwards. With a kit like this, you really do make that perfect assassin archetype, and I could see Batman that acts like this genuinely striking fear into the heart of his enemies. Another little thing with this particular series I want to bring attention to is the gimmicks or unique mechanics it could bring. The team up feature from Rivals is super cool, and I think something similar to that could be really interesting. But I also want an actual rivalry mechanic, quote unquote, where if your character's nemesis is on the opposing team, both you and them get a special bonus of some kind. Now, I don't want to spoil the coming roster, so I won't show off any rivalries in this video, but just know it's a mechanic I will be going over in the next DC hero shooter video. That being said, there is a team up Bruce has that I'll explain after we go over our next hero, the Boy Scout in blue, the last son of Krypton, and the most heroic of heroes, Superman.
God, look up there.
What the hell's that?
Easy, miss. I've got you.
You've got me? Who's got you?
Now this might shock you, but what you're looking at isn't just any ordinary Superman. Marvel Rivals implements a bunch of different versions of characters in their story, and with a title involving Crisis, I think DC should too. And the best way to set in stone that you're focused on giving a variety of versions is to implement that rule into the Trinity in some way, your face characters for the brand. So why not show off the newest, most popular world going, the Absolute Universe, with Superman. Plus, on a side note, Absolute Superman is the reason I wanted to make this whole thing. His comic abilities gave me ideas for his kit while reading them. Now, he is a Vanguard and will focus on damage mitigation and space control, but that only seems fitting when you remember Superman is all about saving others whilst being an absolute powerhouse. So if we're to dive into his kit proper, we must start at his basic attacks, and he only has one, that being the Kryptonian Fist. Much like Batman's punches, he also has a main melee strike. I imagine it would have a little bit more range, but not a lot more. It is a short distance strike, and it increases strength with the use of one of his passives, Solar Conversion. We'll go over that in a little bit. Just know the Kryptonian Fist isn't just a punch, it does have a secondary feature, but for the most part, he's basically similar to Hulk, throwing out those fists and just punching everyone in front of him. Now we are going to move on to his main sort of abilities first though, and that starts with his heat vision. An iconic element of Superman's powers being that he can shoot lasers from his eyes, we gave him that here. And what this is a really long distance bolt laser that he fires when he uses this ability. Now it does have a cooldown whenever you use it, but to exchange for the fact that this is only ranged attack and it's a one shot, as in like you can only shoot it once before it goes on cooldown, it has strong damage and no drop off. The idea is if you see an enemy in the distance who's running, who's low on health, and you've got that aim, as Superman you can quickly just pop that laser bolt and damage them. Or you can use it to threaten someone who's trying to push into the front lines, so when they come to dive, maybe your supports or something, they land in with low health. Generally speaking, it's a really useful thing when played properly, but it could also be a really punishing power if he goes to use it and either misses his shot or expends it on someone who realistically he shouldn't have and then needs it again later on, but it's on cooldown. Alongside this, he has a Rush of Hope. This ability is meant to emulate that feeling when you see Superman fly in front of someone and stop a train before it hits them, or he catches a bullet out the air before it hits a reporter or something. The idea that he's able to just bolt in. And so Rush of Hope targets allies. It's kind of like, now I did write this by the way before Johnny and the Thing dropped in Marvel Rivals. but it's kind of like how the Thing can leap over to his allies. Superman dashes over to an ally who's within the radius of his passive Hero's Cape. Once again, we'll get to the passives in a minute, we're just dealing with the abilities right now. Once he dashes there, he immediately provides them and himself with a very small amount of shield. I'll explain why it's really small when we get to the Hero's Cape passive. That has some additional features that applies to him consistently. So it's only a small bit of shield, but he immediately applies both them and him shield, and it basically repositions himself out of either in the face of danger for his supports, or pulls him out of danger if he was too far forwards and needs to dash back into his own team. The idea here, like I said, is to emulate that feeling of Superman flying around at really quick speeds to save people. Then we get into his suit mode features. Now in the Absolute Universe, Superman's powers are all sort of controlled and manipulated via his suit Soul. Now, Soul in the comic doesn't necessarily do what I'm about to describe here to a full extent. We don't fully know the limits and capabilities of the suit just yet in the comics since it's such a new storyline. However, I think keeping that element of the suit being a key part of him in his character design could be really fun, and giving him this sort of stance change, I think it's a really dynamic way to use him. So the first mode is Flight. Now this is not the mode he spawns in. He spawns in Defend, but this is a mode you can switch to whilst playing as Superman. When you switch to the flight mode, you stop walking and you move with a flight speed, think like Iron Man or Johnny, or when you press the fly button as someone like Star-Lord. And whilst in the flight mode, you are faster. However, the ability Rush of Hope is deactivated. This is really good for getting to key areas, or maybe getting a perfect angle to fire your heat vision, or just getting out of danger if you need to fly out and Rush of Hope's currently on cooldown or something. Of course, like I say, you can't fly up, spot your ally, and then Rush of Hope to them. It has to be a case of you're either in Defender mode and use it, or you're in Fly mode. But speaking of Defender mode, what this does, and this, like I say, is the way you spawn into the game, but if you're in Flight, you can switch back to Defend at any point. And when you're in Defend mode, you do walk around, you don't have a flight speed, and all damage you would usually take has a minor reduction to it. It wouldn't be a massive one, it would just be sort of like a small percentage of damage reduced, but it's just a consistent amount of damage you're not taking. So when you Rush of Hope in front of someone, the reason why you only get a little bit of shield is basically because Suit Mode Defend is giving you that damage reduction anyway. Now, all of these abilities tie into his main passive, which is Hero's Cape, and the whole reason why I chose Absolute Superman and not any of the other Absolutes, and the whole reason why I wanted to do this video in the first place. You see, part of Soul and Absolute Superman is his cape is made of Kryptonian dust, which can fly around and sort of heals those he's saving. It embodies the idea of what Superman is, this icon of hope and heroism. It embodies that, and it allows one to really see what it means when like a hero's cape is wrapped around you. A symbol I love that Mirio used in My Hero Academia, for example, for those of you who like anime. And I think that's something we can implement into his whole character design. And it's such an iconic part of his silhouette and how he looks as well, that massive red cape. So, the way this works is Superman always has a radius around him, and this marks his cape's reach. All allies within this radius receive minor shield generation, so long as they're not taking damage, and then as Superman takes damage, the radius will begin to shrink until it's fully depleted, after which Hero's Cape and both suit mode powers are deactivated. When Superman is healed, however, the cape's radius increases at the same rate. So if you're getting spammed with heals and you're taking loads of damage, the cape doesn't just shrink, it sort of fluctuates with your health bar, basically. The idea here is Superman at maybe a third his health doesn't have Hero's Cape active, but anything above that does. Superman at full health has the maximum radius of Hero's Cape. And then, like I said before, the idea of it healing people, or giving them shield, should I say, when they're not currently taking damage, is to do with the idea that like Superman has saved you and now his cape is patching your wounds while he does the heroics and the works. What this means is when you Rush of Hope in, you, because you're in Defend mode, are taking reduced damage, and your ally who you just Rush of Hoped in front of is also getting that shield generation because they stop taking damage because you're in between them and the bullets. That's the sort of concept here. Now, to convert Hero's Cape and sort of stand on the opposite side of it, as Hero's Cape gets weaker, Solar Conversion, his next passive, gets stronger. You see, as Superman takes damage, his arms begin to glow, and therefore Kryptonian Fist begins to deal increased damage. Outside of combat though, this sort of ability slowly fades, and it's not tied to the health effect when it fades. So if you get Solar Conversion up to max and you're fighting, then you leave combat and you don't get healed, your Hero's Cape will stay small because you didn't get healed, but Solar Conversion will fade away. What this means is that Superman is all about sort of pushing his health bar to its limit. As your cape gets weaker and you are unable to rush of hope to more and more people, and your allies are getting less and less shield from you, your physical damage output is getting stronger. So you have to know where the limit is to balance. When do you say, I know I'm getting stronger, but I need to leave now because otherwise I won't be able to rush of hope to someone to get out of this fight? That's the sort of concept we're looking at here. The other thing is, once I hit that third health bar, sure, my Solar Conversion's still going to be on max, but I'm no longer taking reduced damage from my suit mode. All these different concepts you have to keep in mind when you're playing as Superman. I think it gives the player tons of agency and ideas, whilst also building this idea of how it feels to be Superman, and it means we can implement arguably one of the most powerful superheroes ever without instantly breaking the game. Now, if you're doing your job as a Vanguard, you're helping your team out, you're mitigating damage, you're taking space, you're going to build that ultimate every now and then. In which case, you're going to have access to Soul Boost. Now, Superman's suit basically overcharges him and sets Solar Conversion damage to maximum output. In addition, during this duration, Hero's Cape has infinite health bar and a wider radius. And then finally, both suit modes are active. For the sake of Rush of Hope, it's still active, even though you have flight. And then what this generally means is you're dealing more damage because of max hero conversion. All your allies are getting the bonuses of Hero's Cape, so they're getting that shield when they're not taking damage. You can fly from suit mode flight. You take reduced damage from suit mode defend. And generally speaking, you don't have to worry, no matter how much the enemy shoot you, about that Hero's Cape shrinking, right? Of course, this is for a short period of time, and then it resets. The visual cue for this, I could imagine being that while Soul Boost is active, the glow that normally builds on its arms from Solar Conversion is all over his suit. I think it could be really fun. And with that, we have a dynamic and iconic Superman kit that is clearly designed around the absolute version of the character, but can still comfortably fit onto an ordinary Superman as a skin you can buy or unlock in the game. Of course, I did mention the team up before, so here it is, the world's finest. This is a team up between Batman and Superman, hence the name, that's the nickname they go by when they work together. And whilst on the same team, Batman and Superman empower each other. The team ups in this are going to be very much so more so about like both heroes gain a featured benefit and less about anchors and then heroes who gain from it. I think that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more interactive. Not to diss Marvel Rivals mechanics, I love the team up mechanic how it is, I just prefer the idea of this personally. So, Batman gains the main sort of gimmick of this, which is his batarangs are now considered explosive batarangs. If he hits someone with a batarang, and then hits them with his gauntlet, the batarang explodes, dealing additional damage. In return, if Batman KOs someone from either throwing a batarang or making a batarang explode, Superman's laser vision immediately resets its cooldown. So Batman can quickly get Superman to get those laser shots off. It's a little thing for Superman. Superman isn't in control of this. It's just something he's going to notice he doesn't have to wait for that cooldown sometimes. And then Batman really benefits from it because he gets those explosive batarangs to deal extra damage. It means that his sneak attacks are going to be even quicker and more powerful. I do believe that maybe giving that sort of damaging buff to an assassin type character could be really broken. And so I understand if people don't like how this worked out. I just knew I needed to give Superman and Batman a team up, and this felt like a fun way to handle it. The other way I could sort of see it working is if instead what we did was we said, when they're on the same team, certain abilities Batman has, say maybe the explosive gel or maybe his grapple and glide, don't deactivate his invisibility. I don't know. Little things like that could possibly work. And with that, we have 2 of our 3 Trinity members completed. But what are the pillars of DC without truth and compassion? Which is exactly where Wonder Woman fits. But in order to keep up the idea of a multiverse of heroes all interacting, she too isn't the Wonder Woman you might all be familiar with. No, introducing Flashpoint Wonder Woman.
You're an American. But you're going to tell me a little more about yourself. Who are you?
No!
He's resisting the lasso of truth. How is that possible, Queen Diana?
It's
In
not.
the case of Flashpoint Wonder Woman, she will play pretty much identically to an ordinary Wonder Woman. So realistically, you could just have her be the usual design, but I think it's cool to lean into these different but still iconic and recognizable looks. As for how I think she should play, well, Diana is a powerful warrior and capable of immense aggression on the battlefield, so I think a duelist is a natural fit. But she's also designed around a lot of defensive abilities. She's armor clad, has indestructible bracelets, and a powerful lasso for control. So I think overall it makes sense to have her be a kind of pseudo tank, a duelist with a lot of armor and survivability powers. Starting off with her basic attacks, we have her Hephaestus sword. Now, this is a wide-reaching melee attack, and I kind of consider it working very similarly to a character like Magic, where she's able to reach out and just swing in these powerful single motion strikes. Maybe there's 3 different directions for her strikes if you do sort of a combo with it, but generally speaking, you have to commit to these attacks. But as a way to make up for that, these attacks do deal quite high damage. Now, of course, much like Batman and Superman, she is very ability reliant. And we're going to start off with just trying to incorporate each of her key weapons. That's something I felt was really important when designing her as a character. Unlike Superman building around his cape mechanic and Batman trying to lean into the archetype of the assassin hero, with Wonder Woman I really just wanted to incorporate each of the iconic and key pieces of what her weaponry is, and then from that build a cohesive kit. So we initially have her bracelets of submission. So when you activate this ability, Wonder Woman sort of stands in a notable different stance to her basic attack with her bracelets on show. During this point, she has an increased movement speed, and all damage dealt to her is reflected in random directions. Kind of think how Cap acts when he holds his shield up. The only difference is, this is for a time period and she can't cancel it. Now, I kind of designed this with that image from Justice League where she runs in front of those people blocking all the bullets. I think that's such a cool scene, and I think trying to recreate that in a fight, running in front of your support and blocking it, or if an enemy who acts much like, say, Punisher and Marvel Rivals ults, then you can run in front of them and try to block as much of it as you can for the duration. Now, I do believe that it'll be really important to give an ability like this, since it lets her run out of any conflict fairly easily or run into one fairly easily, a notable cooldown, unlike the rest of her abilities in the kit. But I think that makes up for it because it's such an important part of the character. That being said, we then move on to her lasso of truth. This is how she gets enemies into positions where she has the advantage, and it also gives her a bit of information. So I wanted to implement the idea of a lasso, that being a hook type ability, think Bucky or Roadhog or anything like that. So she whips out the lasso, if it hits an enemy, she then pulls that enemy towards herself, quite close. But then I also wanted the idea of it's the lasso of truth. The enemy cannot lie, they must confess to whoever she asks. And so I needed a bit of information given to her, but I didn't initially know what I wanted from it. And so what I settled on was, once she uses the lasso on an enemy, that person's ult meter is revealed to her for a period of time. Now, this means that she knows whether or not to worry about certain ults and levels, but I also can see that being not that great as well, or not as useful, especially for higher level players. Don't get me wrong, the Lasso of Truth doesn't need to give super useful information, though hook itself is still a really powerful feature. So the info being quite low level quality, I think is fine. But also, the Lasso of Truth is such an important part of her and who she is as a being, so I wouldn't mind changing that. If you guys have any cool ideas on how the Lasso of Truth could work mechanically, please do let me know. But beyond that, we have an ability that I think when you first read it, you think this is very Flashpoint Wonder Woman orientated, but then in a moment I will explain how it could work for basic Wonder Woman, and that's Mira's crown. So she lobs out Mira's crown, and it will ricochet between enemies, dealing low damage. Now it can bounce between enemies up to 3 times, but that's only if the enemies are there for it to bounce between, and then it will return to Wonder Woman. This is her main ranged attack, and it would have a really short cooldown, but like I say, it's not going to be high damage. Now, the way that you could alter this to fit to, say, classic Wonder Woman, is you simply make it her tiara. You know, she iconically, in a lot of adaptations and a lot of depictions, uses her tiara as a ranged weapon. So why not let her do it here? In the case of the initial skin, that being Flashpoint Wonder Woman, of course I'm going to make it Mira's crown, since the whole point is she did kill Mira and took her crown for herself. And then finally, we have Themyscare and Might. This is an ability where you charge up your sword behind you and then swing it upwards, launching enemies into the air directly in front of you. This can also be used to disrupt enemy abilities and specific ults within the game. You can use it either as a counter, saving it against certain attacks that you know are coming so that you can prevent them, or you can combo it with the lasso, whipping someone in, and then immediately while they're briefly stunned from the hook, you take advantage to get that charge up on the sword to deal that heavy damage to initiate that really close range 1v1 fight before going in with those basic sword swings. But of course, past her abilities we do have those passives, just like the heroes before. The first one is Daughter of Zeus. Now this is a basic slowfall power, basically when Wonder Woman's in the air descending, she can hold the jump button and her descent will be slowed, much like a character like Magneto in Marvel Rivals. The idea behind this is she is the daughter of Zeus, and so heights and the skies are not a threat to her, she is but a goddess. And then the secondary passive is Atlantiade's armor. Now this is to do with the fact that she wears an almost indestructible suit of armor at all times. And so I wanted to implement a mechanic to do with that with her pseudo-tank-esque role on the battlefield. So why not have, and now I understand that some people might not like it, some people will like it. It's one of those, when you put random chance into people's character abilities, people often hate when it's used against them. But also, I think in those clutch moments where it does pop off, it can be such a cool thing to say like, this passive saved my life and I was able to then win the fight. And that is basically whenever damage is dealt to Wonder Woman, there is a 5% chance it is deflected in the direction of the person who attacked her. This is not used as a reliable method of sending damage back to people. It's not used as a reliable method for surviving threats. This is primarily a way so that when tons of shots are being fired at Wonder Woman, since she is going to be trying to take a bunch of those shots, that she might not get hurt by all of them, 5% of them are going to basically do nothing to her and possibly even damage the enemy. Now, as a pseudo-tank sort of DPS duelist, your job is to make sure you are dealing damage whilst also mitigating a certain level of damage coming towards your team, more specifically yourself. This really gives you a good survivability, and when you pull it off, you can guarantee those kills, and doing that will build your ult meter, until eventually you get access to amazing Amazon, Wonder Woman's namesake. What this does is have her smash her bracelets of submission together for a super powerful shockwave blast that stuns all enemies within a radius for a short duration. And then for a slightly longer duration, she gets a speed and damage boost, letting her quickly run between these enemies and try to hit them and deal as much damage as she can. So there you go, not 1 or 2, but 3 DC hero concepts to be implemented into a hypothetical DC hero shooter. I think the designs turned out great, but if you'd have handled them differently, please comment down below and tell me. I've been loving your comments on the Marvel Rivals videos. And speaking of which, if you guys want to watch some Marvel Rivals videos where we do the exact same thing but with Marvel heroes and villains, check out this playlist linked in the card above, or just go to the channel and have a look. I'll see you guys next week for a look at Heroes for Hire in Marvel Rivals. Thanks again, everyone.